It's been nearly 7 months since my husband discovered my affair. Both of us are 39 years old, and prior to the revelation, my husband was a kind man. He wasn't flawless, of course. He had his peculiarities, but I meant everything to him. Our family was his top priority. He devoted long hours to work to ensure that I could stay at home and care for our son and daughter. He used to do these lovely things to brighten my day, and they worked like a charm. My husband was quite the opposite. In high school, he had been impolite, charismatic, and sometimes even troublesome. He got into numerous fights and had many girlfriends. Yet, for some reason, the summer before our senior year, he wanted to talk to me. I was the nerdy girl who loved video games, comic books, and cosplay. He had always been kind to me ever since he moved to our town in 8th grade. He was distinct, his family was unique, and everyone wanted to be around him. I attended my first party because of him. He taught me how to dance salsa, and then he drifted towards the popular crowd, and I thought that was the end of our connection. However, that summer, he walked into the comic shop where I was working and spent the entire day talking to me. He even walked me home. One day led to many, and by the end of the summer, we were dating. My senior year was the best of my life. I became part of the popular crowd, attended numerous parties, but my favorite moments were the ones we spent together, just the two of us. Naturally, I didn't neglect my studies. I worked hard, and I made sure he did too. We both gained admission to the same college and got married shortly after graduating. Our son arrived a year and a half later, followed by our daughter 20 months after that. Throughout all of this, my husband worked diligently to provide for us. Finding a job was challenging for him because he lacked experience, so he took on various odd jobs in construction, grave digging, janitorial work, and as a receptionist, until he finally secured a position as a computer technician. During this time, my husband gained a significant amount of weight, but it didn't diminish his desire. As for me, I maintained my figure and worked hard to preserve it, and soon we became a somewhat cartoonish couple, a rotund but muscular man with a slender, fit wife. One Halloween, we even dressed up as Barney and Betty Rubble, embracing that stereotype. It's not that my husband didn't exercise, he simply struggled to shed body fat. Nevertheless, his appetite remained consistently high. On the other hand, my own desire was dwindling. It's not that I didn't desire intimacy, it's just that I often lacked the inclination. As the years passed, I also found myself less willing to have closeness. I was perpetually fatigued. Raising the kids really exhausted me, and cooking and cleaning took a toll as well. Yes, he did assist with the laundry, cooking, and cleaning. He made sure that Saturdays were for takeout, and Sundays were designated as daddy cook days. But I still felt fatigued and uninterested. While I used to enjoy when he took the initiative, I found myself saying no more often than yes. The longer we went without intimacy, the more it affected his mood. He would become irritable and complain, and when we did have love, it often turned into a prolonged session that left me sore for days, with him still wanting more. He would request that I cosplay for him, but I wasn't enthusiastic about it, despite him willingly wearing the costumes I made for comic and video game conventions, even though he disliked them. Our lack of closeness became a significant issue for him. We even sought couples counseling, and our therapist suggested that my husband might have borderline love obsession, but exclusively directed towards me. Concerned, I had a medical examination and discovered that I had low estrogen levels. I was prescribed several medications to address this, but they didn't prove effective. My doctor eventually diagnosed me with female impotence, a condition I initially believed to be fictitious. The affair wasn't premeditated, romantic, or elaborate. It simply happened. I was out with my friends, all of whom were married and attended the same church. We were bowling and having a great time. It was the first time we had gathered since the lockdowns, and we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. After the game, when all the ladies had left, instead of heading home, I stayed at the lounge to sober up a bit. It was there that I met my affair partner, a young man in his early 20s who noticed me reading a manga on my phone. We struck up a conversation. I wish I could blame it on alcohol, but I was only mildly buzzed. I wish I could attribute it to loneliness, but my husband always desired me and showered me with attention. I wish I could claim an unhappy marriage, but in reality, we were very content. To be honest, I still don't know why I did it. I mean, I can recount how it happened. We talked for a few hours, he flirted, I flirted back, he walked me to my car and he kissed me. Instead of pushing him away, I reciprocated the kiss, and we ended up having love in a nearby motel, but I don't understand why I did it. It didn't last very long. Initially, he tried to persuade me into BJ, but I refused. We just went at it and was very unsatisfying. About halfway through, I suddenly realized what I was doing, pushed him away, apologized, got dressed, and left. When I returned home, I found my husband asleep on the sofa with our child, and I retreated to the shower, where I couldn't help but cry over my actions. I tried to convince myself that it was a terrible mistake and that it would never occur again. After the shower, I left my husband and kids on the sofa, went to bed, curled up into a ball, and cried myself to sleep. The next day I had the intention to confess the truth, but fear held me back. So I pretended as if nothing had happened. For 5 weeks I continued this charade until I realized I was overdue for my period. I took a pregnancy test, and to my astonishment, it showed a positive result. I couldn't comprehend how this could be possible. My husband and I had only loved twice, and he had undergone a vasectomy. Moreover, I had ensured the man involved in the affair wore protection, and he hadn't even finished. Feeling puzzled, I consulted a doctor who confirmed my pregnancy. During an awkward discussion, we surmised that the man must have tampered with the protection, and the doctor explained that pre-cum might have played a role. Overwhelmed with fear and guilt, I arranged for a termination, knowing I couldn't bear this child and inflict such pain on my husband. My plan was to keep this a secret, but upon returning home after the procedure, my husband unexpectedly arrived early. I forced a smile, but he looked at me with a seething anger. An email from our health equity account had notified him of a new insurance claim. He demanded to know the identity of the child's father, and tears welled up as I began to cry. He repeated his question, inquiring about the duration of the affair. Despite my anxiety, I admitted it was a one-time incident, that I had resisted and pushed the man away. However, he remained skeptical. His voice grew louder as he repeated the question, and it felt as if his anger pierced through me. Desperate to convey the truth, I confirmed my account, but he forcefully grabbed my chin and slammed against the wall. This was the first time he had ever acted this way, but his eyes were filled with tears he struggled to hold back. He demanded details, what we had done, the man's appearance, where we had met, and he used hurtful words in Spanish to describe me before storming out of the house. I cried and asked my sister to pick up my children because I needed to be alone when he returned. He didn't come back until after midnight, and I met him at the door, horrified to see his black eye and bruises. Concerned, I asked if he was all right, but he shoved me aside, insisting the red stains wasn't his, and locked himself in the bathroom. I sat by the stairs, anxiously awaiting his reappearance. When he finally emerged, he sneered at me and headed to the living room. I attempted to communicate with him, wanting to understand who he had fought with, but he initially ignored me. Eventually, he turned to me and uttered, "Who do you think I had a fight with?" I turned pale and he resumed watching television. The following day, I visited the bowling alley and inquired around, but somehow my husband learned the identity of the man involved, and they engaged in a fight. In our town, skirmishes at the alley were a regular occurrence, to the extent that the sheriff would only intervene if there was a fatality or serious injury. Over the following week, he banished me from our bedroom, relegating me to the sofa. I attempted twice to slip back into our bed, but the first time he shouted at me to leave, and the second time he forcibly pushed me away. Silent glances were exchanged after I climbed up from the floor, but no words passed between us. I retreated back to the sofa, where my tears flowed freely. On the day of my termination appointment, he sternly instructed me to go through with it, and I silently nodded. Although I was apprehensive about facing it alone, his response to my request for his support was filled with disdain, telling me to go take care of myself. Upon returning from the procedure, I noticed storage pods outside the garage, where my husband and his friends were unloading its contents. My inquiry about this was met with an aggressive response, as he told me it was none of my concern. His friends appeared surprised by his behavior, while I retreated indoors. Several hours later, the sound of hammering drew my attention, and I approached to investigate. To my amazement, he was converting the garage into a separate living space. I made attempts to apologize and engage in conversation, but he consistently ignored me. Then, one day, I poured out my feelings in a torrent of apologies, which only seemed to infuriate him further. He declared that he wouldn't waste any more energy on me and mentioned that if it were up to him, he'd divorce me. However, after consulting numerous lawyers, he realized that between alimony and child support, he couldn't afford to live independently, leaving him stuck with me. The initial month was marked by awkwardness, as it was challenging to explain the situation to the kids. I extended invitations for him to join us for meals, but he continued to disregard me. He'd return home, briefly check on the kids, ignore me, and retreat to his garage apartment. During the second month, I pleaded with him to attend counseling, and he reluctantly agreed. However, he remained mostly silent during the sessions, reserving his outbursts for accusations of my infidelity, for which I had no valid defense. Then came the devastating revelation that he had been involved with multiple women. I initially thought he was fabricating these claims to hurt me, but his expression told a different story. When the counselor asked how many women he had been with, he replied that he had lost count but had been engaging with various women nearly every other day for the past 3 weeks. He explained that he needed to feel like a man and desired to be wanted. He admitted to using websites and apps for these encounters. In response to the counselor's assertion that 2 wrongs don't make a right, he argued that it wasn't 2 wrongs. I had cheated, broken our vows, lied, gotten pregnant, and attempted to conceal it, while he was merely adapting to our new dynamic of pretending to be a happy couple in public, but living as roommates at home. It hurt, but I saw it as an opportunity to win him back. The following month, he began openly conversing with various women in my presence, and I had finally reached my breaking point. I expressed my desire for a divorce, but he scoffed at the notion, daring me to proceed while threatening to publicize our situation extensively. He vowed to broadcast it far and wide, from shouting it from the hills to posting it on our family's Facebook page, and even including it in our annual holiday newsletter for all our friends and family to see. His threats silenced me abruptly, and he instructed me to leave, though I was reluctant. We engaged in heated arguments, and it strangely felt satisfying to elicit some emotional response from him. Somehow we ended up having an hours-long closeness, which left me feeling content, thinking we were on the path to healing. However, he abruptly instructed me to depart, declaring that my usefulness had worn thin. I couldn't fathom hearing those words from him, but I complied and left. In the past few months, this pattern persisted. Every once in a while we will hook up and he will kick me out as soon as he is finished. I was aware that he continued to pursue liaisons with different women. Nevertheless, we began to communicate more, particularly during counseling sessions, though our relationship remained far from healing. During one counseling session, he confided that something inside him was broken. Looking at me, he felt as if he had squandered years of his life and was now merely going through the motions. I inquired if there was a chance for us to start anew, but he responded that once the kids were old enough for him not to pay child support, he would initiate divorce proceedings and left abruptly. Given his adamant stance on divorce, I questioned why he continued attending counseling every week. I am convinced that he may be uttering these hurtful words merely to inflict pain upon me. Recently, we celebrated our anniversary with a family party, where he portrayed the role of a contented husband. I found myself consumed by self-loathing for the harm I had inflicted upon him, yearning for the return of our past life. I missed the intimacy of our marriage, the gentle hand-holding and cheek kisses during the gathering. Even his sentimental speech tugged at my heartstrings, and I desperately wanted to believe it. Upon returning home, I attempted to initiate love, and we engaged, but immediately after, he abruptly departed. I pleaded with him to stay, but he ignored me, leaving me to cry myself to sleep. I'm in dire need of assistance. I yearn to reclaim my husband and restore our life together. Is there anyone who has experienced a similar situation or knows of someone who has and can offer advice on mending our marriage? Please, I implore you to help me. Update. It has been a challenging 3 months, progressing slowly and steadily. My husband and I decided to inform my parents shortly after his post. During our visit, we sat them down, and they directed their anger toward my husband. They were upset because they had warned him that something like this might happen due to my ASD, as I tend to be highly gullible and easily influenced. They believed that his attempt to treat me normally had backfired, and my affair served as confirmation of their concerns. This infuriated him to the point where he raised his voice at my parents, marking the first time he had ever displayed such rage towards them. I experienced a sensory outburst during this altercation, vividly recalling why I turned to that other man. However, my primary concern was for my husband. He essentially broke down while confronting my parents, shedding tears for the first time since the ordeal began. I set aside my own pain and anxiety to provide comfort to him. Witnessing me do so moved my parents to tears as well. My husband eventually excused himself from the situation, and I followed him. Once we were alone, I disclosed everything to him: how the other man approached me, the conversation we had about Goblin Slayer, the fact that I had originally intended to wait out the buzz I was experiencing, but we ended up discussing various manga topics, and the moment when he kissed me. I allowed it to happen, as I didn't want this stranger to be upset with me, although I have no valid excuse. What I did was unquestionably wrong, foolish, irrational, and selfish. I continued to speak, and my husband simply listened. I could see the anger in his eyes, but he refrained from saying or doing anything, choosing instead to listen. A week later, my husband started attending a support group for betrayed spouses twice a week in a neighboring town. I had no prior knowledge of such a group's existence, but he showed me the website and the community center. I even accompanied him to a meeting. Hearing his pain was heartbreaking, and listening to the stories of others like him was overwhelming. The sheer magnitude of their collective suffering was absolutely crushing. Last month, my husband appeared to be doing better, and even returned to our home. While we were far from returning to normal, we were beginning to find a new equilibrium. He surprised me with a dinner date 2 weeks ago, and everything seemed to be going well. We were engaged in conversation, laughter flowed, and there was a fleeting moment of connection. I could see it and feel it. However, our waiter arrived, and it turned out to be the man I had been involved with. In a split second, my husband transformed from a sweet, caring man into a raging beast, assaulting the man. I covered my ears and cried as the screaming became too much for me to bear. My husband placed noise-canceling headphones over my ears and guided me outside. I was in tears, fearing that he would be arrested, as we had reservations, but the police never showed up at our home. Since then, he has been staying in the garage. He continues to attend the support group twice a week and sees his therapist and our counselor. He is struggling immensely, and I wish I could simply undo everything. I miss what we once had.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Story 2. I'm a 41-year-old man, and I've been married to my 41-year-old wife for 12 years, but we've been a couple for nearly 20 years. We have 3 beautiful children, a cherished home, and both of us are in careers that we are passionate about and enjoy greatly. While our relationship isn't flawless, I never imagined that she would betray me. The shocking revelation came to light on our anniversary day back in April during the late evening. I received multiple Facebook messages from an anonymous source using a burner account. These messages included pictures, text message screenshots, messages, Snapchats, and a multitude of hurtful and inappropriate memes. Initially, I was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material and didn't know how to react. However, within a few minutes, I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach as I realized that my wife had spent a significant portion of the past summer, fall, and winter pursuing, and in some cases, having closeness with various men. Setting aside the mystery of the source of this information for the time being, I immediately confronted her. In hindsight, It might have been wiser to digest the entire story before reacting, but panic took over, and I couldn't control myself once I learned about her first affair partner. At first, she denied the allegations, but eventually, she confessed to having slept with this particular man on multiple occasions. This revelation was painful enough, but delving further into the materials I had been sent and realizing the extent of the situation pushed me into a deep depression. I must admit that I haven't fully recovered from it even now, nearly 2 months after the D-Day. There were additional men involved after the first AP essentially cut ties with her once he had gotten what he wanted from the relationship. While I can't definitively prove that she had love with all of them, I do have evidence that at least one of them was invited into our home while I was away visiting family with our children. She vehemently denies this, insisting that the original AP is the only one she had a physical relationship with. Is she genuinely remorseful? I believe there are some signs of remorse, but there are also indications that she regrets getting caught. Nonetheless, on the surface, she has expressed regret for her actions and a desire to salvage our marriage. As a result, we've been attending couples therapy since early May, though progress has been painfully slow. Clearly, the trust I once had for her is now completely gone. Undoubtedly, this experience has forever altered my perception of our relationship. However, I'm willing to give it a chance because I love her. Her life has been marked by significant hardships. Her father was consumed by obsession, and her mother essentially abandoned her and her sister at a young age, leaving them to be raised by their grandparents. Their extended family is incredibly close-knit. A few years ago, she tragically lost her sister to obsession. In 2019, her father passed away unexpectedly, shortly after they had reconnected. There's been a lot of trauma, and while it doesn't excuse her infidelity, it's worth noting that she was in a very dark place leading up to it. In my own observations, I noticed that she had been drinking more than usual, spending a significant amount of money on new clothes, and dedicating a lot of time to self-improvement efforts like Botox and a keto diet. Meanwhile, I was primarily focused on taking care of our young children during my free time. She was often out with friends or too exhausted to contribute to our marriage. In hindsight, there were warning signs. Our bed life had dwindled, and I attributed it to the trauma mentioned earlier and the demands of raising our kids. She became increasingly argumentative over minor issues. At her cousin's wedding in September, she got so intoxicated that I had to take her home, all while she berated me and said hurtful things in front of our children. Our relationship issues largely stem from her dedication to helping her sister through her own obsession. As she poured most of her time and energy into this endeavor, we began to have conflicts. I felt abandoned by her and believed she wasn't making any progress with her sister, who clearly wasn't ready to accept help. There's much more to this story, but it provides some context for when I believe our relationship started to deteriorate and why. Fast forward to last summer, she met this man, and within just 3 days, she was already engaging with him in a suggestive manner via text. I had been pleading for affection for months, receiving very little in return. How am I supposed to handle this going forward, assuming my wife and I can overcome this ordeal? Love has now become a trigger for me, among several others. Whenever I attempt to initiate intimacy and she declines, I immediately spiral into a dark place, reminiscent of how I felt during D-Day. At times, it seems like she genuinely desires our relationship to succeed. But on other occasions, I have doubts. I've noticed that when we're drinking, she becomes more open and understanding compared to her sober self, who often tries to avoid discussing the affair. She's complained about having to address the same questions repeatedly and doesn't readily offer hugs or genuine empathy when I need it most. She has given me reassurances that she's no longer in contact with the affair partner, or anyone else for that matter, and I'm inclined to believe her at this moment. However, I can't help but wonder what might happen if she feels the urge to seek someone else in the future. I'm struggling a lot. If you've read this far, I genuinely appreciate you. You are what's helping me keep going, along with hope. Aside from my beloved children, hope is pretty much all I have left. Update. I'm pleased to report the following. I have no STIs, my 3 children are indeed mine, and I've consulted with a divorce attorney to explore my options should I decide to go down that path. My wife and I are making very gradual progress in couples therapy. Our therapist seems to think that I'm taking an unusually long time to come to terms with what has transpired and to begin the process of forgiveness and moving forward. My wife concurs and has expressed this multiple times. I've also been quite angry, especially regarding my wife's willingness, through texts, etc., to engage with the affair partner while making me essentially plead for intimacy. I've communicated to her on multiple occasions that I want her to desire me the way she desired him, and that I desire the kind of spontaneous attraction she effortlessly offered him. To put it simply, I'm extremely envious of what he received with little, if any, effort. Whenever the subject arises, she becomes defensive. She explains that these things will come in time. However, I'm pressing the issue, making it feel unnatural because I keep bringing it up. I've explained that as her husband and as a man, it's very difficult for me to accept, and it's one of a few things that I believe is impeding my path to forgiveness. Last night, we had a major argument. I walked away, took a drive, and she started texting me. Eventually, I responded. When things began to escalate, she called me, and it got worse. We yelled at each other over the phone. I told her I couldn't continue living like this, and she responded with a dismissive, "Whatever," claiming I was irrational and needed to calm down. I drove home, ready for another confrontation. Full disclosure, I was emotionally charged, but I have never and will never resort to physical violence against my wife. It was our words that escalated the situation. Again, she labeled me as crazy, became distant and repetitive in her responses, like a robot. When I informed her that I would be visiting a lawyer first thing on Monday morning and wanted to disclose the affair to everyone in our social circle who hadn't been informed, she threatened me with a video she claims to have from years ago of me shouting at her in the car with our kids present. A form of intimidation? Then she accused me of caring more about my reputation than anything else. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Last weekend, I convinced her to let me see her phone. She reluctantly handed it over for about 3 minutes until she realized I was browsing her Google history. She then became furious and demanded her phone back. She became extremely upset. Before returning it, I found a recent Google search of her affair partner's name, repeated twice within 2 minutes. She tried to pass it off as a possible autofill mistake, but I'm not convinced. Last Sunday marked the 1-year anniversary of her meeting him. I drove away that afternoon and spent a few hours by myself, ignoring numerous text messages and phone calls. Eventually, she figured out my location, and we had an extended conversation. It felt like the woman I married had returned. She was attentive, understanding, highly empathetic, affectionate, and offered to provide definitive proof that this would never recur. She even took me out for ice cream. That evening was the most enjoyable one I'd experienced since D-Day. I finally felt like she truly understood me and was genuinely committed to improving our situation and helping mend our marriage. However, as you've already read, everything unraveled. I apologize for the scattered and frantic nature of this post, but I'm genuinely concerned about my current mental state and whether it's acceptable to have these feelings and questions. Additionally, I'm unsure if her words and actions align with the situation. Lastly, I want to mention that she quickly changes her stance when she realizes I'm dead serious about pursuing a divorce. She is clearly afraid of it, though I'm not certain what exactly frightens her. Perhaps it's the potential for a contentious legal process and discovery phase. I remain convinced that she is still concealing a lot from me. My instincts tell me that maintaining secrecy necessitates our continued togetherness.